What is going on, YouTube universe? Welcome to the Hip and Shoulder, but more importantly, welcome to another edition of the Round Recap, where we sit down and reflect on the previous round of AFL action, and round 10 was one of those rounds that decided it was going to throw up more questions than answers. I feel some teams are now breaking ahead of the pack, some teams are definitely raising more questions than they should be, and collectively, it was a very interesting round, one that was encapsulated by the fact that it is the beginning of Sir Doug Nicholls Round. In the past, we've obviously seen only the one round dedicated to the Dreamtime at the G and the Indigenous history being paid homage to, but over the last few years, I feel we've seen that collective round 10, round 11 combination, and we definitely saw that this past weekend. There were a handful of teams that were represented by wearing their Indigenous jumpers that were designed for the 2025 season. We had some teams actually go by their Indigenous club names. They even went as far as shifting some of their club logos. I love this particular time of the year with AFL football because I think it is very critical to pay homage to the Indigenous community and Indigenous players, past, present, future, and just really honing in on that culture, and especially for the players that play the game, not just for AFL, but AFLW as well. The first game of the round was at TIO Stadium, and being able to see the community up there, the Indigenous community, just really loving and enjoying the game whenever this time comes around, I really love watching it, because collectively it just shows that everybody, regardless of your creed, regardless of your skin color, regardless of where you've come from, can all come together to love our great game. And that's what it is all about. And as I said, it did kick off on Thursday night with Gold Coast hosting Hawthorn at TIO Stadium. I feel this game was already won before it started, and some people might think that's a controversial take, but given the fact that the Gold Coast played the Western Bulldogs in round 9 at TIO Stadium, they effectively had 2 weeks to acclimatise themselves to the weather conditions and the heat and playing on that field, whereas Hawthorn only had a number of days. And when you look at the track record of Gold Coast playing at TIO Stadium, I'm pretty sure they are unbeaten there. And that starts really culminating with questions of, should the Gold Coast play more games there? And I've said in the past that if they ever wanted to bring a Darwin team in, I definitely feel Darwin will be the next team maybe included outside of Tasmania. We know Tasmania is joining in around 2027, 2028. Will they bring a Darwin team in? There is talk about a Northern Territory team being introduced, so we have all facets of Australia included in some way, shape or form. But definitely feel Gold Coast had the edge coming into this game, regardless of who they were playing against. And it's a very interesting kind of concept with these two teams coming together to play each other, because the Gold Coast are absolutely flying this year, and Hawthorn have finally started to get their season back on track after a very hot start. Need I remind people at home, Gold Coast still have a game in hand to play Essendon at the end of the year. They have played one less game than every other team in the competition, and they are still playing as good a football as we have seen the Gold Coast play in a very long period of time. I don't know whether that is because of favourable fixturing like we've seen here. Like, they go to TIO, it was a real raffle to see whether they would beat the Bulldogs, but then to be able to back it up, stay there for an extra week and play at TIO again, definitely feel like they were given, effectively, if you want to call it, a home ground advantage, given the fact that they've been able to acclimatise. But it was a great game of football, I feel, especially the finish, given that it came back to an 8-point differential by the end of the game, was huge, because when you break down the scoreline for this game, at quarter time, the Gold Coast led Hawthorn 5 goals 32 to 2 goals 12, and I thought, here we go, this is going to be an absolute smacking. Half-time, the Gold Coast led 9-4-58 to 7-2-44. Hawthorn starting to get things back on track. There were periods in that quarter where the Gold Coast ballooned out to a big lead, but then Hawthorn started chipping it back. Then we saw the big shift come in the second half. At three-quarter time, it was Hawthorn that led Gold Coast, 12-3-75 to 11-6-72. And then the final scoreline was the Gold Coast winning by 8 points, 16-8-104 defeating Hawthorn 15-6, 96. Very accurate game of football when you take into account we have seen both the Gold Coast and Hawthorn in the past be inaccurate and lose games because of that inaccuracy. But this was a game that, as a neutral supporter, I was on the edge of my seat for the final 2 or 3 minutes because Hawthorn still very much were in this game and had every opportunity to stand tall and win. And it was on the back of Mabior Chol late in the game being able to pick up the ball one-handed in the forward line, kind of sell the candy a little bit to one, and then straighten up and kick what was one of, I feel, if not his best goal that I've ever seen him kick. Really reignited Hawthorn collectively. But the Gold Coast were able to just stem the flow, and it is definitely a different beast under Damien Hardwick. There is a more defensively sound style of game. They do love to run the handball, and that is just something that Damien Hardwick, I feel, really builds teams around. He loves that frantic kind of football, and the Gold Coast have been quick to kind of pick up that game style from him. Obviously, the acquisitions of Daniel Rioli and John Noble off of half-back have really lifted that defensive kind of slingshot from half-back to move the ball forward again. Ben King, arguably in the best form that I've ever seen Ben King in. The midfield group, even though we've seen players like Matt Rowell off of recent weeks drop, he really lifted his game this week and was amongst one of the best on the field. It was a huge dynamic shift to, say, the Gold Coast team that we saw lose to Richmond a few weeks back. This is a different kind of team, and going to TIO, given their track record there, they just turn into a different team. They're a different beast. It is a very interesting watch. They are absolutely flying this year and could very well play finals for the first time. I don't know whether they'll do damage when the time comes, but they're definitely putting themselves in a position to at least make club history in that aspect. Hawthorn should really hang their heads high because this was a game that could have been an absolute blowout and a completely demoralising loss at that fact. The fact that they've been playing such a great brand of football but could have potentially been absolutely embarrassed and belted, it's a motivational dropper. You lose the ambition to really want to try to mount a comeback when it's just too insurmountable to do so. So the fact that they were blown out in that first quarter but just stemmed the flow and brought things back on their terms was completely admirable from a neutral point of view. As far as injuries or anything like that, there are no injuries to be spoken about, but I think there has been a delayed injury. I'm pretty sure there's something to do with Jarman Impey, if I'm not mistaken. I saw something posted about him potentially not being 100%, which would be damning for Hawthorn, I feel, because I think Impey has been one of those players that has been flying under the radar as far as being underrated goes, and he's an absolute workhorse, that guy, since coming to Hawthorn. So if he has gone down injured, it'll be an interesting watch, but I don't think Hawthorn really take too much out of this game in the way of being too demoralised. I think they hang their hats high, knowing that they made the travel, knowing that they were up against a team that kind of had that little bit of advantage, and they're gonna bounce back. Hawthorn are the type of team where they're not gonna cop two losses in a row. They're gonna cop this one sweet. They're gonna readjust and they're gonna bounce back again. That's what Hawthorn have done all year, and that is what I think separates these two teams. We're still yet, I feel, to see the worst from Hawthorn, yet we have seen, I think, the worst from the Gold Coast. It is a very interesting kind of concept when you throw the two teams up, because equally they're doing just as good as each other, but I feel we are yet to see the Hawthorn beast truly unleashed, whereas we now know what the Gold Coast best looks like. So, interesting. Very interesting. I think we can lock one in for finals in the way of Hawthorn. I don't know whether Gold Coast can keep this momentum up, because we have seen them drop off in the past. So if they can continue it on, they play finals for the first time in 2025, and who knows, they could be that dark horse kind of team that makes it into the top 8 and then does the miraculous and makes it all the way. I don't think they will, but opportunity comes knocking. Can I just say as well, before we move on to the next game, that when it comes to talking about recruits of the year, I feel at this point in time, Bailey Smith is probably front-running that by quite a margin. But one player that I feel isn't being spoken about enough is John Noble. This is a player that at Collingwood was absolutely devastated when he did not make that premiership team. And I'm still personally, as a neutral supporter, very dirty on Collingwood for doing that, because I feel Noble was such an integral part of getting them to that final position and then getting to the grand final. And then when the time comes, no, we're not going to play you, we're going to play somebody else. And absolutely heart-wrenching. At that moment, I knew Noble would end up going elsewhere to a team that might appreciate his skill set a little bit better. For John Noble to come out and be as impactful on a game of football as he has been at the Gold Coast this year is absolutely insane. And that stems from the game that he played just this past weekend at half-back. 36 disposals and over 1,000 metres gained. I know that metres gained stat doesn't mean much to some, but that just shows the influence he has with ball in hand. He's not dicking around and kicking backwards or kicking sideways. He is always actively looking to kick the ball on down the line, hitting targets, creating opportunity, and he fucking tore it up on the weekend. It was insane to watch. I definitely feel we should be having more conversations about John Noble, and there's going to be other players I kind of pick out during this video, but I feel definitely that we're pretty narrow-sighted and tunnel-visioned into only seeing certain players. So definitely a huge year from John Noble, and I feel they won this game off of the back of his efforts as well. So definitely we need to start being more aware of the efforts of some players over than others, because some players this year are flying under that radar so severely low to the ground it isn't funny. Friday night action was at the SCG with Sydney hosting Carlton, and I honestly thought if there was any team that could go to Sydney and knock off Sydney, it was Carlton. But their season just continues to slightly derail every so often. Just when you feel that Carlton have found their form again, they decide they're going to go barreling off of a cliff, and they did that in this game, losing to Sydney by 16 points in a game that they could have very well captured. But again, this was a game that inaccuracy from Sydney could have and should have led to a much bigger win. It is very interesting to see the dynamics of these two teams here, because we always know off of past seasons, and this is backed up by fact, that there's always a team that makes finals one year and falls off the following. And Sydney has been that team this year that has fallen from grace out of that top 8 situation. But Carlton, a team that I honestly thought would be a top 4 contender this year. I had them winning the premiership this year against Geelong in the grand final. That was my prediction at the start of the season. They are so far off that mark it isn't funny, and I can't understand why that is the case. We saw such a precise and managed team the previous week against St Kilda, where Carlton with ball in hand made every moment count, and in the dying moments when the game was on the line, they knew exactly how to control the situation, and I honestly thought they would have taken that into this game. They would have been able to, keep certain players from Sydney at bay. They would be able to control the football, move it on slowly and precisely, but instead, they allow players like Isaac Heaney to go get career high, stats in his performance. They allow Chad Warner to get off the chain. It was absolutely ridiculous to see how easy at some points in this game Sydney were able to transport the ball from back half to forward half without any resistance from Carlton at all. They are definitely two different teams compared to when you look at how their 2024s played out. Sydney obviously losing Errol Goulden, and I feel when we're discussing Sydney this year, the loss of Errol Goulden is so impactful in the way that I still feel by foot Errol Goulden is the best kick in the competition, especially when it translates from kicks inside 50 and hitting targets. He is absolutely elite, and they haven't had that this year. So when it's come to trying to transition the ball and losing that kind of player, it's hard. But where do the question marks start popping up with Carlton? I know they don't have Nick Newman in defence, but is that really too big of a hole that has now caused Carlton to completely derail their entire season? I don't understand. They still have Patrick Cripps. They still have Sam Walsh. They have Adam Chera. They've got George Hewitt. They've got Tom De Koning. They've got Harry Mackay. They've got Charlie Curnow still firing. It starts making me think whether trading out players like Matt Kennedy, who is one of those other players that has transitioned over to the Bulldogs this year and is having a criminally underrated season, given that we're not talking too much about what he's doing over there. They trade Matt Owies over to West Coast, who might not be setting the world on fire this year, but was very critical to the forward makeup of Carlton. Whenever the ball hit the deck, he was always there crumbing. He was a viable target moving the ball forward. I don't know whether they're missing that. I don't know. Carlton are just holding up signs that are making me question where this drop-off has come from and where the improvement is going to come from. When we look at the scoreline overall from start to finish, Carlton were in control for 3/4 of this game, and this is why I start to question where that inability to slow time down and just maintain possession and be smart with ball use disappeared from, because the week prior, as I've already said, against St Kilda, they possessed that completely. In the first quarter, they led Sydney by 6 points, 4 goals to 26 against 3 goals to 20. Halftime, they were in front by 7 points, 6-4-40, playing 5-3-33. At 3/4 time, they led by 5 points, 7-6, 48 to 6-7-43. And then in the last quarter, Carlton only went on to kick 2 goals to finish on 62, while they allowed Sydney to kick away with 5 goals 5. They could have ballooned this game out. I actually believe, if I look at the stat line, I'm almost certain Isaac Heaney kicked 4 or 5 behinds off his own boot. I need to check. He did. Isaac Heaney kicked 5 behinds. Joel Amadi kicked 3 behinds. If they had just straightened up their kicking, this could have been an absolute smacking. This is what I don't understand with the split between these two teams. As Sydney was struggling and then just found a way to dig deep and shift momentum in that final quarter, which was very inspiring to watch as a neutral supporter, don't get me wrong. But the drop-off from Carlton to see 3/4 of football so tightly managed, and then just to let Sydney run away with the game, was absolutely just mind-blowing to me. I don't understand it. But Sydney get away with a win at home, a much-needed win to kind of progress their season a little bit, and Carlton left in no man's land. I have no fucking idea what they're doing. The first of many on Saturday saw Collingwood hosting Adelaide at the MCG. Adelaide was one of those teams this week that decided to fly under the Indigenous moniker. They were represented by the name Kawana, and their logo looked absolutely elite. As I said, I love when teams really dive on in with, the Indigenous culture when it comes to these particular rounds. But this was a game that I feel was very defining for both teams. It showed that Adelaide's best can compete with the best, while I feel it still pushed the envelope with the fact that I think Collingwood is currently the best team in the competition. Stats back it up. They are playing a really good brand. They are so defensively sound. Their midfield is running well. Their forward line is finally comprehensive, even though they are missing some players from that makeup. They are an elite unit, which speaks volumes to the fact that Adelaide only fell short by 10 points, given some of the size gaps we saw during the game when it comes to the scoreline. At quarter time, Collingwood led 4-3-27 to 3-2-20, and then at halftime, led by less of a margin, with 6-7-43 playing 6-2-38, opened up to 5 points a gap, and the game was well and truly on the line for either team to run away with. At 3/4 time, Collingwood had inserted a little bit of dominance by skipping ahead 9-9-63 to 7-5-47. And then it was that final term where it could have been a hell of a lot worse, because the trajectory of Collingwood started going through the roof. Adelaide, in the dying moments, wrestled it back just a tad, with the final scoreline being Collingwood 11-12-78, defeating Adelaide 10-8-68. This has caused some debate by media personnel, including Kane Cornes, and Kane Cornes loves to take a fucking stab at Adelaide wherever he can, let's be real. But a player that he has been glazing for a very long time is Isaac Rankin. And we can't underestimate, Isaac Rankin is an absolutely elite player. Since coming to Adelaide, he has been absolutely flying, especially this season. but I believe he had 2 shots on goal within about the 35-metre range, missed both of them completely, and you think off of, those 2 kicks, you lose by 10. Hindsight, if he kicks those goals, they win, but it shifts momentum of the game as well. Kane Cornes is now questioning whether or not his kind of resume or his overall aura, as Kane likes to talk about, his reputation, has that been damaged because of those 2 missed opportunities? I think that's a bit far-fetched to be talking about. I think one game does not make or break a player, especially one that has the capabilities that Isaac Rankin does have, but still is, a huge talking point, I suppose, because when it comes to players like Isaac Rankin, you'd probably hang your hat on the fact that he'd be snagging those goals. So, as I said though, hindsight, it's a fucking terrible thing. Yes, they could have kicked those goals, but then time resets, the ball goes back to the middle, and it gives opportunity for Collingwood to relaunch out of that centre line again. So, very interesting, kind of talking point, I feel. I feel one that might be a little bit clickbaity, and let's be real, whenever Kane Cornes talks, he's always looking for clicks, and he's definitely going to be getting them off of that. But I thought Adelaide's efforts here were absolutely incredible, but this kind of played out the same way that Sydney game did. It was tightly wound up until 3/4 time, and then Collingwood skipped away in a game where inaccuracy could have again been a blowout, especially when I bring up the scoreline here. Jamie Elliott only kicked 1 goal for the game. Now, he's one that he's been kicking 2, 3, 4 goals a week, very accurate, but he missed 2 shots on goal, and that is not something that we've come accustomed to seeing Jamie Elliott do, because he's such a clutch player in front of the sticks. Bobby Hill kicked 1 goal, 1, not very much influence. Patrick Lipinski missed a shot. Beau McQuarrie missed a shot. These players that I feel would normally stand up in a situation and kick these goals are kind of a little bit wayward. So again, opportunities that could have been setting up for a much bigger win went begging, but Collingwood still dug deep and found a way to get the job done without their forward line absolutely popping off. Like, collectively, Jamie Elliott and Bobby Hill kicked 2 goals. Outside of that, their goals came from, let me tell you where they came from. Will Hoskin-Elliott was their lead goal kicker with 2. The main goal kicker on the day was Darcy Fogarty with 4. So when you look at their forward line and you break it down, Collingwood has been so effective this year with their forward targets because they've recruited the right way. But Myercheck, Membry, Bobby Hill, and Jamie Elliott only managed between the 4 of them to kick 4 of the 11. They then relied on midfielders to get the job done, and those transitioning players. Dan Houston off of half-back kicked a goal. So it's not alarming for their forward line, but this just speaks, I think, volumes to the overall kind of quality of the team they're building here, because they don't have to solely rely on those forward players to hit the scoreboard, because they can have an even spread. When you have a look at Adelaide's scores, however, the only player that I think wouldn't be aligned with their forward line that kicked a goal is maybe Jake Saligo, because he's more of an inside midfielder. But Darcy Fogarty, Taylor Walker, Isaac Rankin, Josh Rochelle, Jordan Dawson, who's played some forward minutes this year. Riley Thilthorpe didn't even score, and I thought that was huge given how influential he's been for Adelaide this year. So a game that was very, very, question marky in the way of player output from some players, but some other players just rose to the occasion and took opportunity, and that's what happens. If a player isn't willing to stand up, somebody else is going to get the job done. But again, as I said when first talking about this game, it was very defining for both teams. I still feel Adelaide's best can compete for finals this year, and Collingwood just continue to solidify the fact that I think their best football is the best in the competition for 2025. Over at Adelaide Oval, Port Adelaide hosted Geelong and got absolutely towed up, and this is now starting to raise question marks on whether Port Adelaide are contenders or pretenders. I have always been on the belief of the fact that because they've always made prelims and fallen short, the true measuring stick for Port Adelaide to have a successful year is to make the grand final. If they get over that hoodoo of the prelim and they can make it one step further, they've made improvement. They can hang their hat on that. But this year, holy shit, I said at the start of the season I thought the loss of Zach Butters early was going to hurt them. They've just now gone and lost Jason Horne-Francis to a hamstring injury. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this dynamic now works, because Connor Rozee has shifted to a half-back role that has seen a different dynamic out of Port Adelaide, but I feel Connor Rosie's best this season has been off of that halfback line, you know, being as a distributing kind of player. But with Horne-Francis out, does that mean Rosie now goes back into the middle again? Do they turn to somebody else? I don't know what they're going to do. Charlie Dixon retiring obviously has left a big hole in that forward 50. I did not expect, well, I thought Geelong would go down and win. I tipped Geelong to win, but I did not think they would win by 76 points. That is absolutely insane. That means in the past 3 weeks, Port Adelaide have coughed up a 90-plus point loss to the Bulldogs and a 70-plus point loss to Geelong. Absolutely insane. I did not think this would happen because Port Adelaide in Adelaide is a tough ask for any team in the competition. But to get it done as easily as Geelong did, fucking hell, blows my mind. It really does. It just really shows the disparity between teams collectively over the league, because you've got Port Adelaide who have such a star-studded list. Don't get me wrong, they have got decent players in defence, up forward, in the midfield, and Geelong always touted each year as an ageing team. They're too old, they're too slow, and they just get it done. Jeremy Cameron, in the twilight of his career, I would argue as he gets older, we've only got a handful more years of seeing him before he decides he's going to go up to the farm and stay there. He comes out and kicks 7 goals like it's no fucking problem. It's Bailey Smith absolutely dominated the outside wing. Mark O'Connor in defence was absolutely huge. Ollie Dempsey had a huge game as well. It was incredible to watch. The only thing that I think left a sour taste in Geelong's mouth was the fact that not long after Jason Horne-Francis pinged his hamstring, Patrick Dangerfield went and pinged his own. And that is going to be an interesting watch, because while I feel Patrick Dangerfield moving out of the midfield has been a great move for them, and obviously getting younger talent through has helped Geelong progress forward, Patrick Dangerfield's involvement in that forward 50 this year, again, talking about underrated players, not many people are talking about how influential Patrick Dangerfield has been, especially when it comes to score involvements and bringing other players around him into the contest and getting them involved. It's going to be interesting to see how long both of those players are out for, because as I said, both of them ended up doing a hamstring injury this week. I think they're reporting that Horne-Francis will probably be out for 4 to 5. I haven't seen anything definitive yet for Dangerfield. He definitely looked a little bit disheartened on the bench, but I wouldn't say he looked as bad as what Horne-Francis did. So hopefully his is only a minor one, at least for Geelong. But injury-wise as well, Horne-Francis wasn't the only one to ping a hamstring, because Lachie Jones pinged a hamstring as well, and I believe he is done for the rest of the year. I could be overreaching. I might have read it wrong. For Geelong, Bose did a hamstring as well, so there were hamstrings all around. 4 players did a hamstring, and then Josh Sin for Port Adelaide managed to do a hip injury that saw him out of the game too. So injury might have plagued the game, but I don't think it played into the outcome at all. Maybe Horne-Francis being out might be definitive for Port Adelaide because of his influence. Lachie Jones is also a solid defender as well, so I feel him going down maybe, but I don't think it makes up a 76-point gap. And obviously Geelong losing Bose and losing Dangerfield obviously adds to that mix as well, because Dangerfield, as I said, collectively has been so great in involving players around the contest. It still just blows my mind that they did it as easily as they did. We can break down the scoreline just to show you how bad it got. At quarter time, it looked like we were going to get a very good game of football. It was Geelong leading 3 goals 1-19 to 2 goals 4-16. Okay, open season here. This is going to be a great game. At halftime, it looked like it was still going to be a great contest. Geelong led 5 goals 3-33 to 3 goals 6-24. A little bit inaccurate in front of goal from Port Adelaide, but I think we've come to expect that from Port Adelaide. Then the downward trajectory started, and if you see the scoreline, it looks like you're getting ready to go down a slope with some skis. It was Geelong leading 10 goals 9-69 to 4-9-33, and I thought, yep, that's all right, game over here. Geelong will just wrestle control. I did not expect Geelong to then come out in the final term and kick, what did they kick? 7 goals 4. To finish 17-13, 115, to Port Adelaide's 1 goal only in that last term to finish 5-9-39. Port Adelaide threw up numbers that bottom of the barrel teams this season haven't even been throwing up. At least some of the teams on the bottom of the ladder have been competitive in the way of being able to get to a 10-goal margin, in the way of kicking 10 goals of their own. It was as embarrassing a loss, I think, as they come. I don't know whether Port Adelaide supporters in general are just going to talk about the fact that, they've been in the media with this whole Willie Rioli thing and it's brought team morale down. I don't think you can make any excuses for a drop-off like this when you're so competitive for a half of football and then the drop-off just absolutely smacks you. Obviously, I think collectively the one thing that probably hampered Port Adelaide the most is losing 3 players to injury, especially Josh Sin early and the sub activated, and then you lose 2 other players to hamstring. You're down to 1 player on the bench, so rotations come absolutely thin. I think they only used 53 out of 75 interchanges, so they fell way short of the mark. So you could probably excuse the margin from that point, but as far as the talent that was on the field and just being very uncompetitive, I don't know whether it's because a lack of conditioning and they're not used to running full games out without breaks. I don't know, but at the end of the day, Port Adelaide absolutely towed, and Geelong just asserting that they are not old, they are not slow, they are well and truly within that premiership window, and they could be trying to hunt down yet another premiership in recent years. The next game, I feel, throws up the most question marks that I've had all fucking season. It was at NG Stadium, and it was GWS hosting Fremantle. Now, these are 2 teams collectively that have been incredibly frustrating to watch as neutral supporters, and I can't even begin to imagine what their actual supporters have been feeling. So much so that I'm actually going to bring up the fixture so we can talk about fixturing when this particular game, comes to mind, because it's definitely, to me, causing a little bit of a conundrum when it comes to discussing how their individual seasons have ran. We're going to bring up GWS and we're going to bring up Fremantle, who were under a different name, so we need to find them. I think that is them there. Brilliant. Okay, so collectively we look over the last couple of rounds. We're at round 10, so let's have a look at as far back as round 5. So before we even talk about this question mark raising game, in round 5 we had Fremantle win by 61 against Richmond and GWS beat St Kilda by 28, but still both winning by emphatic kind of scoring. They both scored over 100 points collectively. Then we move on to the following week, and Fremantle fumble against Melbourne, who at that point hadn't won a game all season, and GWS played such an incredible scrappy game of football and lost to Adelaide in Adelaide after what was one of the best performances the week before that I've seen GWS collectively throw together all year. They then transition to Fremantle managing to pick up a win against Adelaide, but GWS dropping the ball to the Bulldogs at home. And I'm like, okay, GWS have now lost 2 in a row, but the seesaw with Fremantle continues to sway back and forth. That then continued because St Kilda the following week absolutely demoralised Fremantle by 60 points, and then Sydney beat GWS, who at that point I would argue was the worst of the 2 teams out of New South Wales. GWS at this point have lost 3 in a row. GWS then find a way the following week in round 9 to defeat Geelong in Geelong, and Fremantle just falls short against Collingwood at home in a game where Collingwood were missing players, were coming off of a 5-day break, and they should have won. It is so frustrating to see where these 2 teams are supposed to be sitting this year, because they are losing the most winnable games that they are being handed this year. And then they come into this game at home, GWS hosting Fremantle. You would think GWS at home, they've got all the pieces they need, they're going to get up and win. They got absolutely belted. Fremantle looked infinitely better. It was a game where, described by my old man watching it as well, Fremantle was so defensively sound in this game, and defense has been something that has been a kind of a caveat for them, a bit of a letdown, because it has been something they've been able to be exposed with when it comes to opposition teams. But they were so defensively sound that you could argue that Ross Lyon was the one that was coaching them this weekend. the scoreline just demonstrates how dominant Fremantle were after that quarter-time performance that really saw both teams crack in. Fremantle at quarter-time led GWS by 6 points, 3 goals, 4-22, leading 2-4, 16. At halftime, they took an 11-point lead, but it was still, we've seen GWS come back from way more. So it was on the line still for both teams. But Fremantle did lead 5-10-40 to 4-5-29. Now, to think GWS kicked 2 goals, 1 for that term, but Fremantle went on to kick 2 goals, 6. This could have been a monster blowout at halftime, which still starts having me question how that is even possible, because GWS, and I will argue this, I will stand on a hill and argue it, they might not be the best team in the competition right now, but on paper, they have definitively one of the best teams in the competition by far. Just star-studded talent, back, midfield, and forward. After up until three-quarter time, up until halftime, I said GWS in the next quarter only managed to rally 5 behinds, 4 goals, 10, 34, whereas Fremantle went on to kick 3 goals, 5, 8, 15, 63. At this point in time, they were just taking the piss, because it was absolutely insane to think after the first quarter they've gone on to kick 11 behinds, even 4 or 5 of those being goals. And it just becomes an absolute blowout. And at this point, I'm watching the game and I'm asking myself, what the fuck is going on? Because we have seen the dips and the high rises from Fremantle this year, but it is hard to see where these fucking dips come from with GWS. I don't understand, especially at home. And then in the final term, Fremantle to go on to kick, what did they kick? 5 goals, 2 to finish 13-17, 95. And GWS managed to scrap 4 goals, 3 together to finish 8-13, 61. What could have been? Let's have a look at the player breakdown, because again, we've done it with the other teams to see what could have happened. Shea Bolton kicks 3 behinds, Patrick Vox kicks 2 behinds, Frederick kicks 2 behinds, Dudley kicks 2 behinds. And again, this was a game where GWS managed to control certain players so incredibly well, because Josh Tracy only kicked 1 goal for the game. Sam Switkowski, who is a known goal scorer, didn't hit the scoreboard on the way of a goal. He only kicked it behind. Michael Frederick managed to find a way to kick 3. Shea Bolton kicked 3. And I think that was the most for the game from any player, actually. 3 goals. It was. And then for GWS, the same shit happened. Toby Green only kicks 1 goal. Jesse Hogan, who fucking kicked 9 only a couple of weeks back, managed to only score 1 goal this week against I wouldn't say worse defense, but comparatively to who he played on against Geelong, to who he played on at Fremantle, I would have thought he would have kicked more than 1 goal. Again, you know, some workhorses got to work and managed to get the job done. Caleb Sarong and Andrew Brayshaw, arguably the best 2 on ground. Lockie Ash in defence, again, just doing big things. Whitfield still had 25. Tom Green still had 25. Finn Callaghan had 24. So a little bit off the mark of where they're usually at, but they were finding plenty of the ball. I don't understand. And I'm probably being stupid in expecting a bit more. But I mean, this has started to now present questions from, again, Kane Corns, Mr. Clickbait himself. But he threw up a list this week saying, 5 clubs that you would hate to support moving into the future. And he listed GWS as one of those clubs. And it's stupid to think that such a star-studded list could be having that kind of conversation point. But they are a team that promises so much and has so much elite talent, and they're just failing to deliver this year. I don't understand. There are so many teams this year that are off the mark to where their standards are set. It is absolutely dumbfounding. But given this fact, I could almost guarantee Fremantle will go on to lose this coming week, and GWS probably come back and have a big emphatic win, because that's what their seasons have done this year. They're on a fucking seesaw. They're jumping up and down. Which way will they end? Who fucking knows? Saturday night saw the Bulldogs at Marvel Stadium scalp another 90-plus point win against Essendon. This was a team that I was actually, I was watching this game and I was watching Essendon play, and I was really scratching my head as to when they were going to kick their first goal. And then the time that went between their first goal and their second, I was starting to question whether that second goal would even come, because they looked like literal training hats, witches' hats, walking around out there. And, well, not even walking, they were just pretty much standing still. And the transitional work from the Bulldogs was just absolutely elite. It was just, Essendon would get the ball, and you'd think, oh, they're going to get a fast break here. Turnover, absolutely killed on the scoreboard. And it was happening every time. If Essendon failed to hit a target, the Bulldogs pounced and made them pay, whether it was a behind, whether it was a goal. This was a game that saw the Bulldogs kick 19 behinds. They still won by 90 points. This should have been a 110, 120 plus point win. This would have and should have been absolutely more demoralising than what it was. Funnily enough, one of my closest friends is an Essendon supporter, and we hang shit on each other. Him an Essendon supporter, me a Richmond supporter, so we're always going at it. And even he turned around and said, post-game, I'm wanting to see what Brad Scott comes up with in the way of trying to say that there were positives to take out of this game. And he did find a way. I don't understand how you've lost by 90 points, but you still come out and turn around and say, oh, I think we did really well at shutting down Bontempelli and Aaron Norton. Let's have a look at the stats, shall we, Mr. Brad Scott? Let's fucking see how well you managed to shut them down. When we look at our goal scorers, Aaron Norton, okay, he kicked 1 goal 3. But he's been having off weeks most weeks this year anyway, so it's not really too big of a scalp when you consider no Jamara Ugle-Hagan, no Sam Darcy. So Norton has been one out, taking the best defender every week. So he kicks 1 goal 3 for the game. Could have easily kicked 2 or 3 more goals and we wouldn't be having this talk. But Bontempelli kicked 2 goals and still had 24 touches. Still pretty influential on the game. When you look at the champion data stats, Marcus Bontempelli, I think, was actually one of the highest rated players on the ground. So, very interesting to say he thought he held him accountable when there was only 2 Essendon players, according to champion data here, that scored more than what Marcus Bontempelli did. So, very questionable. I think it's laughable. I actually did say to my mate that Brad Scott would probably go without any questioning about this performance in the way of, oh, he needs to be sacked or, where to from here. I don't think Brad Scott is the man to take Essendon to their next premiership, and I think they are far off it while Brad Scott is in the coach's box, because there were decisions made in this game and even heading into this game that have me scratching my head. You've got a young up-and-coming team. You want to get as much minutes into these kids as possible. You've got Al Hawley, who since coming into that lineup has provided so much run and dash with the ball. He gets subbed out. He's not injured. He gets subbed out of the game for Dylan Shiel. But why is Dylan Shiel even starting the game as a sub when his move to defence for Essendon this year has been one of the revolutionary moves for them? He's been good off of that half-back line. Why start a player like that as a sub? You put him out there as one of your senior leaders and you have him kind of help control and help lead on field. It's just so damning. I don't understand. And then you've got young players that are getting a lot lumped on them, like Caddy and Kako, who might not live up to expectations some weeks and they're getting dumped on. It's a very interesting, and the one, I almost forgot about it. Playing Zach Merritt as a dedicated forward, I still don't fucking understand why or how that is even a move. There's just so many questionable decisions here that I don't think even leave just me asking questions as a neutral, but a lot of Essendon supporters are asking as well. I mean, Todd Goldstein has 6 disposals for the game, I'm pretty sure. 6 or 8 disposals. Why are we even playing Todd Goldstein in this day and age when you've got 2 metre Peter who could be doing your ruck work for you? Like, okay, he's not your number 1 ruckman. You got Sam Draper as your ruckman. I understand that. You've got Todd Goldstein as a dedicated ruckman in the reserves. I understand that. But you've got a man that has absolute size that could dominate most other ruckmen just purely off of his height. And you're still not utilising that to your best ability. You're keeping him dead in your forward line, having little to no impact. Don't understand it. The scoreline will show you just how bad this game was from Essendon. At quarter time, the Bulldogs led 7-3-45 to 3 behinds, 3. At halftime, the Bulldogs led 10-8-68 to 1 goal 3-9. At three-quarter time, the Bulldogs led 15-13 103 to 4 goals 4-28. And then the Bulldogs went on to finish 18-19 127, defeating Essendon 5-6 36. It was such a deplorable performance that Essendon allowed Bailey Dale off of half-back flank to accumulate 49 disposals and have 1,016 metres gained, beating John Noble's 1,001, which I thought was insane to start the weekend, but we've got somebody to surpass that. And Bailey Dale's 49 disposals now means he has had the most disposals by any Bulldogs player in that club's history as a defender. Are you fucking kidding me? This could have been and should have been a hell of a lot fucking worse. And I'm telling you right now, Brad Scott should be counting his lucky stars that this wasn't, 110, 120, 130 point loss, because a lot of these behinds that they were missing were very gettable. And this could have, and it has shades, and it reminds me of the game a few years back where the Bulldogs absolutely destroyed Essendon by over 100 points. And we saw Essendon players getting jeered by their own fans, getting spat on, getting sworn at. It was very reminiscent of that fact, and that is not boding well for a team that is undergoing a transitional phase with young kids coming through. You definitely don't want to be having that look. But the Bulldogs, the way they're now playing football, they have gone from a team that started the year off a little bit shaky, and people might have thought, okay, they'll play finals, but are they going to do damage? This is a top 4 worthy Bulldogs team that is going to challenge for the premiership incredibly hard this year, especially given some of the injuries they still have. They still have Sam Darcy to come back in. They still have Adam Treloar to come back in. They have players on the outskirts that are ready to come back in and make an immediate impact, and that just makes the concept of how well the Bulldogs are currently playing so much more infinitely fucking scary for the rest of us. The first on Sunday saw Richmond hosting North Melbourne at the MCG. Now, North Melbourne, I believe, hadn't won a game at the MCG since 2017. Unfortunately, that changed because North Melbourne did pick up a 4-point win over Richmond. And again, it was one of those games that, just like Richmond versus West Coast the week prior, it was a little bit scrappy, but as a Richmond supporter, I loved watching it because it was two teams down the bottom of the barrel that have nothing to lose, everything to gain, and they just both cracked in and went absolutely hard, and that's exactly what we got out of Richmond and North Melbourne. As a Richmond supporter, coming into this season, and I've said it in almost every single video I've done this year, I didn't expect much. Maybe 1 or 2 wins if we were lucky. Coming into this game, we have our 3rd win under our belt. We were looking for our 4th. Had we won it, I would have been absolutely ecstatic. But to still see a team fight for 4 quarters of football and just lose, as heartbreaking as it was to not get the win, you can't fault effort. And just seeing a 4-quarter performance is so inspiring for myself as a Richmond supporter, knowing that we're heading in the right direction. And it's on the back of the talent of young kids that we've got coming through that has really taken this team to the next level. Like losing Graham and Baker and Bolton and Rioli, and then even players before that like Dusty and Cochin and Rewalt have left big gaps and big shoes to fill. And by no means am I suggesting these young kids are already doing that. But to see Sam Lawler step up like he has really cemented that he is that number 1 pick, and I feel he is the future of our club. Kane Cornes has even gone on to say he's the future of the competition with what he does. Thomas Sim's coming in. He might not get much of the ball, but when he's got it, he uses it so incredibly well, and he provides a contest. Jonty Fall, again, might not get much of the ball, but when he's got it, he does great things. Luke Traynor, he's had up and down moments, but he is going to be an absolute star in that defensive line for us. And then we've still got Harry Armstrong, who was doing good things before he got injured. We're still yet to see Josh Smiley at the level. We're still yet to see Taj Houghton at the level. And when both of those players crack in, I'm telling you now, Richmond are going to be a different beast. We're going to see Smiley, who is akin to a Patrick Cripps type, like a big-bodied midfielder that likes to crash packs and win contested ball. Taj Houghton, I was happy to pick him up and lose Shea Bolton because Taj Houghton is effectively a Shea Bolton but with a very defensively sound game. Loves running down and laying tackles, loves getting in and under the contest, isn't afraid to kind of shy away from the ball. I'm so excited about the team that we're building and moving forward with. It is going to be so good. And then we've still got players like Tyler Young to come back from injury, Josh Gibcus to come back from injury, Maikelti Lafau, I believe, came back through the VFL this past weekend, so he might not be far away from senior selection, and I feel he adds a different dynamic to the team. Jacob Bauer, when he's available, still does the exact same thing, and we're now seeing players like McAuliffe get an opportunity, and he's really taken that opportunity by the horns the past couple of weeks. Still got Tyler Sonzi on the outskirts trying to crack in. I would love to see him get midfield minutes, but apparently Uze loves playing him as a forward, so who fucking knows. But it's going to be interesting just to see us moving forward. I was very happy with the effort that we saw out of Richmond this week, and North Melbourne just digging deep and finding a way to get it done. It was just such a great contest overall. I want to point out a stat though, because the commentary team could not get over this stat. This stat was before halftime. I'm going to get an overall stat up now. But the Bulldogs Essendon game, I believe, overall for the game, only had like 70-odd stoppages for the entire game. We had over that period of stoppages in the first half of this game. The stoppages was absolutely insane. I'm trying to see here how many stoppages there actually were collectively. I don't know whether do they talk about stoppages? They're giving clearance numbers. There was well over 100 hitouts collectively. There was almost 90 clearances collectively. Stoppage clearances, there was 69. But yeah, the stoppage game was insane, and the tackle numbers back that up, because when you look at the amount of tackles that were laid by certain players, Toby Nankervis and Tristan Cherry laid the most tackles by any players on the field. Toby Nankervis had 13, Tristan Cherry had 12, Jack Ross had 11, George Wardlaw had 10, Colby McKercher had 10. It was a game where the contest was so closely driven, and it was just tackle after tackle, and it was pressure after pressure. I think at one point Richmond had a pressure rating of 274 or 75, which is one of the highest pressure ratings that any team has generated over the 2025 season. So a game that both teams just came into it knowing it was very winnable, hunting for that win. North Melbourne were the one that walked away with the 4 points, but I think both teams walk away with a hell of a lot more than just that win. They walk away with pride. This is a loss that I think Richmond supporters will be a little bit dirty on, because we could have won. I've got some personal opinions with the fact that I think both sides of the story. Nick Larkey was getting scragged all day and couldn't get a free kick. Tom Lynch was getting scragged up the other end and couldn't get a free kick. A few unpaid marks here and there as well. But it was just a great contest. Two teams, as I said, with nothing to lose. Everything, just on the table and just bearing it all. And as a supporter, you can't ask for more than that. What excites me the most about this contest as well is at quarter time, it looked like North Melbourne were going to absolutely destroy us. They led 6 goals straight, 36 to 2-1, 13, and I thought, here we go, it's another fucking round like this. And then at halftime, Richmond managed to stem it back with North Melbourne leading 7-1, 43 to 6-2, 38, only keeping North Melbourne to that 1 goal won for the game for that quarter. Richmond going on to kick 4 goals, one of their own. At 3-quarter time, North Melbourne led 10-5, 65 to 9-6, 60, and then obviously that 4-point win at the end with 12-6, 78, winning 11-8, 74. Had opportunities to win late. Tim Taranto, I think, had a shot on goal that just went awry. It would have put us up by, I think at that point in time, we would have been up by maybe 2 points or a point. But again, hindsight, terrible thing. But as a Richmond man, we might not have gotten the win, but I was just so incredibly stoked with the effort. Up at the Gabba, Brisbane hosted Melbourne. This was a game, again, I expected Brisbane to do big Brisbane things and win, but they lost to Melbourne by 11 points. I don't fucking understand. This season has thrown so many curveballs at us, it's not funny, because Brisbane, for large periods of this year, have been touted as, defending their premiership well, and they're still one of the best in the competition. But I definitely feel they're a margin off of where they were last year. And Melbourne, after getting their first win, have really dug deep and picked up some very inspiring wins. And this was one of those moments. This was a game that players like Christian Petrarca really rose to the occasion. Max Gawn did Max Gawn things. Brisbane, you couldn't fault the effort because the players here, like Lachie Neale has 30, Will Ashcroft has 30, McCluggage has 28, sorry. Dunkley has 28, Dane Zorko has 27, Zach Bailey has 27. Like, they had so many players that were so highly rated with the number of disposals they were racking up, and the movement of their ball was great. But I think the big talking point here, and I think it's not one that many people have had this year up until this point in time, and again, it was Mr. Kane Cornes himself. We're talking a lot about Kane Cornes today. He has said that the loss of Joe Danaher heading into 2025 is now becoming very stark for Brisbane, because Eric Hipwood has never been that number one man, but now he has to be, and he's being exposed. And, you know, the reliance, I feel, too much on some of the young kids is weighing a little bit heavy on Brisbane. Whereas Melbourne have really stepped up their game because of the young kids, and there's not a reliance on them having to do it because so many people around them are getting the job done as well. But with Brisbane, you've got all of these players, and it's all the senior players leading the way, but then you've got players like Fletcher, like Levi Ashcroft, Logan Morris as well. Those type of players, I feel there's a lot of pressure on them to internally be as good as the players around them, where Melbourne, I don't think they've kind of had that. That doesn't seem like the same dynamic. It's been a little bit more free-flowing, and that just makes me question more as to why Brisbane weren't able to truly get a stranglehold on Melbourne here, because we know Melbourne collectively have been so makeshift on things they have to have done. You know, in their defense, they don't have Jake Lever, so it's a matter of now trying to find something that works with Stephen May. In their forward line, they are so haphazard, it's not funny, but they're still finding a way to get shit done. I mean, I don't know how Melbourne found a way to crack through with as good of a defensive and midfield kind of core that Brisbane have. But then when you look at the stats, Harris Andrews only has 10 disposals for the game and takes fuck all marks. It just drives me. It drives me to the point of insanity trying to work out where these efforts are coming from with some teams, and then the drop-offs happen from others. This is a game, again, where both teams had opportunities to really take a hold of the game. Brisbane to win, Melbourne to absolutely put the foot down and just fuck off with it. Keziah Pickett kicked 4 behinds. Harrison Petty kicked no goals, 2 behinds. Charlie Cameron, no goals, 2 behinds. Who else? Logan Morris kicked 3 goals, again, having to stand up on his own because Eric Hipwood could only manage 1 goal on his own. It's just... Harris Andrews even kicked a behind with his 10 disposals. It's just very... This round was very... As I said, we come out of this round with a lot more questions than answers, because it really makes us think, are we starting to see Melbourne turn things around, or was Brisbane just playing poor football? Is Brisbane playing their best and getting knocked off by teams that are, when I say lesser than them, I'm talking about just comparatively for the season overall? But Brisbane dropping games to teams like Melbourne, does that speak more on Brisbane's ineffectiveness, or is Melbourne rising to the occasion? You know, it's just questions, answers being thrown out all over the place, and it's going to be an interesting watch, because I still think Brisbane comfortably top 4 this year, and they'll challenge to go back-to-back. Melbourne, on the other hand, after a slow start, are starting to find their feet, and it could be one of those teams that, with a good run, could end up pushing for that lower echelon of the top 8, and it'll be very interesting if they do that. We've seen in the past teams like Sydney lose their first 5 or 6 games and then make that top 8 at the end of the year. If Melbourne can do that and then start getting players back into their system, they could be one of those teams that make the finals and start throwing weight around and you know, deciding outcomes. So, going to be very interesting again, but I don't know what we take out more out of this game. Am I more impressed by Melbourne picking up the win at the Gabba, which is always a huge ask, or does complacency about Brisbane's game start creeping in again? This was a game that Brisbane didn't even slow start. They have, over the course of this year, started off very slow, left the door open for a team to run over the top of them, and that was it, game over. But this was a game that Brisbane led comfortably, I feel, throughout the duration. At quarter time, they led Melbourne 6-3-39 to 3-4-22. Half time, they led Melbourne 8-7-55 to 6-6-42. At three-quarter time, they led 12-9-81 to 10-7-67, and then only managed to score 7 points for the final term, ending 13-10-88. Melbourne went on to kick 4 goals, but almost managed to kick... They kicked 8 behinds. It should have been a blowout by Melbourne's run at the end. And it didn't happen until halfway through that final term, because Brisbane, according to the timeline here, and from what I saw, led for majority of that final term, and then Brisbane flicked the switch, and it was just goal after goal after goal. It was an onslaught. I don't understand. I don't understand. The final game of the round saw a huge upset at Optus Stadium, with West Coast defeating St Kilda. All fucking week, feel free to go check my tipping video for round 10. I said that West Coast were going to cause an upset, and it was the week, as far as the gauntlet goes, to lock in West Coast for a win, and I didn't do it. I went with St Kilda, because I thought, no, St Kilda have been playing better football sustainably than West Coast. St Kilda's going to win. I should have just gone with my initial thoughts. West Coast never looked like they were going to lose this game. Bringing up the scoreline, it speaks volumes. At quarter time, they led 4 goals 2-26 to 2-2-14. Even though it was only a 12-point margin, 2 goals, St Kilda come back into it. You could have argued, yeah, St Kilda can rally that. But then at halftime, for West Coast to move 7-5-47 to 4-4-28, I thought, okay, West Coast are going to do it here. I was convinced at that moment St Kilda were not going to get back into this game. And at no point did they ever look like getting back into it. At three-quarter time, West Coast led 10-10-70 to 6-6-42. And then at full time, 16-12-108, defeating St Kilda 12-8-80. So for the rest of the game, after half-time, St Kilda managed to kick themselves... What did they kick? They kicked 8 goals 4. West Coast in that second term went on to kick 9 goals 7. Again, could have been a game with those 12 behinds that could have been a bigger margin, which would have upset a lot more St Kilda fans. This was a game that I thought they could win, but I was kind of on the wayside about. And I recently sat down trying to look through the fixture and work out where the Eagles would get their next win from. And I honestly thought that playing Richmond later in the year at Optus Stadium was probably going to be their most gettable win. But to beat St Kilda, you start getting some inner belief, and you can't fault the football that we've seen West Coast play over the last couple of weeks. They were incredibly competitive against Richmond. They've come out and won the following week against St Kilda. We're not expecting big things out of teams like West Coast, but a win like this means so much, and it has caused a bit of a debate amongst some people. I've got a good friend, again, who is a West Coast supporter, and when it came to setting up for this particular video and like working out my votes for the MVP award and things like that, I think this could be a game that, even though West Coast got the win, St Kilda poll all the Brownlow votes, because when you look at the stat sheet, it is just St Kilda players everywhere. It is very hard to question whether a West Coast supporter had a better game than the St Kilda players that you're going to see me mention later in this video, because even though West Coast did get the win, all 3 votes for my MVP award for this round are going to St Kilda players, and you'll understand why. I don't know whether there has been a point in history, and I'm assuming there would have been, where a winning team doesn't poll a Brownlow vote for that game, but as my friend said, they will happily, at this point in time of West Coast's kind of build and run, take 4 points over any player getting a Brownlow vote. And I would argue that as well. I really would. I think if Richmond were to win and get 4 points under the belt, but they didn't get a player poll or vote for that game, I really couldn't give a fuck either. Because, you know, ultimately at the end of the day, Brownlow votes aren't going to build momentum and belief within a team. It's a win that is going to do that. And West Coast did that comfortably. This was in a game that had St Kilda have all of their best players available, so it's not like they're playing without the players that we've seen play over recent weeks. And as I said, their players were playing out of their socks. The best players on the field were St Kilda players. The only things really that you could question to come out of this was Jack Macrae is now injured with a punctured lung, didn't even fly home with the team. So what's that got to do for St Kilda's midfield? Because he's been huge this year. Nasiah Wanganeen-Malira has picked up an ankle injury and he's questionable about whether he'll play. They have been, when you look at the scheme of St Kilda's top 5 players, Wanganeen-Malira and Jack Macrae have been in the top 3 St Kilda players this year. You could throw Jack Sinclair in there with the top 3 players. Insane. They lose by 28. Jack Higgins kicks 5. It's just... St Kilda are one of those teams that, again, promise so much, and they recruit well and they look good pre-season, and then the season proper comes out and it turns to shit. I don't know whether not having Max King out there is being too detrimental to them, and obviously not having Tim Membry in backup and having to rely on young kids to get the job done is too much of an ask. But West Coast standing up tall in this game was absolutely huge, and they still have some of their best players out as well. So incredible scenes. It really was. As a neutral supporter, to see West Coast win was very, very inspiring football. Just to see how they rallied around each other, and obviously with the sad news this week of Adam Selwood losing his life, not long after Troy Selwood lost his life 3 months prior. Incredibly disheartening to hear that news, but obviously with Adam being so tightly connected to West Coast, it was going to always inspire them. And getting that news and knowing that has happened with a player that played for that club with all of his heart, to come out and get that win, it would have meant so much to every player connected to that club, and they did it in a very big way. It could have been even a bigger win. It just means now that all teams in the AFL are on an even playing field, because each team has now won at least one game of football. So West Coast fans, I think, are just stoked that they're going to go through a season without having to endure not picking up a win, because I know many West Coast supporters were starting to dread that fact. But West Coast picking up a big win, and as a neutral supporter, could not be happier for them. After 10 rounds of football and heading closer to that halfway point of the 2025 season, this is how our ladder is shaping up. We have Collingwood, who have shifted into first place on 32 points. Brisbane have dropped down to second place on 30 points. Gold Coast have moved up to third, and Hawthorn have dropped down to fourth. However, they are tied equally on 28 points apiece, remembering that Gold Coast still have a game in hand to come at the end of the year. The Bulldogs have moved up to fifth, Adelaide have dropped down to sixth, and Geelong sit in seventh, all tied on 24 points. We have GWS finishing off the top 8 in 8th position. We have Fremantle, who have shifted up to 9th, and Essendon, who have dropped down to 10th, all of which are on 20 points. We have Carlton that have dropped down to 11th, Sydney that have shifted up to 12th, St Kilda that have dropped down to 13th, Melbourne that have moved up to 14th, and Port Adelaide, who have dropped down to 15th, all of which are on 16 points. We have Richmond in 16th on 12 points, we have North Melbourne in 17th on 10 points, and we have West Coast picking up their first win, however still behind the mark, in 18th place on 4 points. This is why, as a Richmond man, I was very excited about potentially picking up a win here, because a win against North Melbourne would have put us on 16 points and would have put us equal for 11th place on the ladder, which is huge, given a club like Richmond was touted to not win a game all year this year. So that's why I'm hanging my hat on positive things. I don't know whether people at home are watching this and thinking I'm being too pro-Richmond, but you got to take your little wins where you can, dependent on, and regardless of who you support. With all the business stuff out of the way, we can now get into the fun stuff. If you've seen these videos before, you know exactly how this is going to go down, but if you're new around here, this is where we dive into the 2025 Hip and Shoulder MVP Award and the Round 10 Team of the Week. The MVP Award works exactly like the Brownlow does. 3-2-1 vote system, best on ground gets 3, and then so on and so on. And for the Team of the Week, I introduced that for this season because there might be players that miss out on MVP award voting that played well in a position that deserves to be recognised in some way, shape or form. And as a collective, with this channel, I want to move in a progressive forward motion, and I feel involving things like a team of the week really opens up discussion points to be had. So much so that I think I'm actually going to start sharing my team of the weeks in the community tab on the page, just so people can start seeing those in image form, and we can get discussions going through comments there as well. But we're kicking it off with the MVP award, and it all starts on Thursday night when we saw the Gold Coast take on Hawthorn. 1 vote, Matt Rowell. 29 disposals, 11 kicks, 18 handballs, 9 marks, 9 clearances, 378 metres gained, and 8 score involvements. 2 votes, Noah Anderson. 35 disposals, 16 kicks, 19 handballs, 1 mark, 5 tackles, 12 clearances, 865 metres gained, 1 goal, and 7 score involvements. 3 votes, John Noble. 36 disposals, 27 kicks, 9 handballs, 5 marks, 2 tackles, 3 clearances, 1,001 metres gained, and 2 score involvements. Sydney versus Carlton. 1 vote, Adam Chera. 34 disposals, 13 kicks, 21 handballs, 4 marks, 7 tackles, 2 clearances, 383 metres gained, and 6 score involvements. 2 votes, Chad Warner. 30 disposals, 22 kicks, 8 handballs, 4 marks, 3 tackles, 4 clearances, 630 metres gained, 2 goals, and 9 score involvements. 3 votes, Isaac Heaney. 38 disposals, 21 kicks, 17 handballs, 2 marks, 1 tackle, 9 clearances, 453 metres gained, 2 goals, and 10 score involvements. Collingwood versus Adelaide. 1 vote, Josh Dacos. 29 disposals, 14 kicks, 15 handballs, 4 marks, 1 tackle, 1 clearance, 524 metres gained, and 5 score involvements. 2 votes, Nick Dacos. 28 disposals, 11 kicks, 17 handballs, 3 marks, 3 tackles, 7 clearances, 384 metres gained, and 4 score involvements. 3 votes, Jordan Dawson. 27 disposals, 20 kicks, 7 handballs, 9 marks, 8 tackles, 3 clearances, 500 metres gained, 1 goal, and 8 score involvements. Port Adelaide versus Geelong. 1 vote, Mark O'Connor. 28 disposals, 23 kicks, 5 handballs, 11 marks, 1 tackle, 1 clearance, 801 metres gained, and 5 score involvements. 2 votes, Jeremy Cameron. 16 disposals, 12 kicks, 4 handballs, 8 marks, 2 tackles, 1 clearance, 268 metres gained, 7 goals, and 9 score involvements. 3 votes, Bailey Smith. 30 disposals, 19 kicks, 11 handballs, 8 marks, 5 tackles, 7 clearances, 700 metres gained, and 10 score involvements. GWS versus Fremantle. 1 vote, Shea Bolton. 24 disposals, 16 kicks, 8 handballs, 8 marks, 3 tackles, 3 clearances, 417 metres gained, 3 goals, and 10 score involvements. 2 votes, Andrew Brayshaw. 30 disposals, 9 kicks, 21 handballs, 3 marks, 6 tackles, 3 clearances, 274 metres gained, and 7 score involvements. 3 votes, Caleb Sarong. 36 disposals, 17 kicks, 19 handballs, 3 marks, 3 tackles, 8 clearances, 695 metres gained, and 8 score involvements. Western Bulldogs versus Essendon. 1 vote, Ed Richards. 27 disposals, 14 kicks, 13 handballs, 3 marks, 5 tackles, 2 clearances, 479 metres gained, 2 goals, and 13 score involvements. 2 votes, Tom Liberatore, 33 disposals, 17 kicks, 16 handballs, 4 marks, 2 tackles, 8 clearances, 463 metres gained, 1 goal, and 6 score involvements. 3 votes, Bailey Dale, 49 disposals, 37 kicks, 12 handballs, 5 marks, 1 tackle, 1,016 metres gained, and 11 score involvements. Richmond versus Melbourne. 1 vote, Tim Taranto, 30 disposals, 9 kicks, 21 handballs, 2 marks, 4 tackles, 10 clearances, 205 metres gained, and 5 score involvements. 2 votes, Toby Nankervis, 15 disposals, 6 kicks, 9 handballs, 5 marks, 13 tackles, 47 hitouts, 3 clearances, 106 metres gained, and 6 score involvements. 3 votes, Tristan Cherry, 19 disposals, 14 kicks, 5 handballs, 1 mark, 12 tackles, 51 hitouts, 11 clearances, 387 metres gained, and 6 score involvements. Brisbane versus Melbourne. 1 vote, Keziah Pickett, 21 disposals, 14 kicks, 7 handballs, 5 marks, 3 tackles, 3 clearances, 325 metres gained, 2 goals, and 12 score involvements. 2 votes, Lockie Neal, 30 disposals, 14 kicks, 16 handballs, 6 marks, 3 tackles, 6 clearances, 415 metres gained, and 4 score involvements. 3 votes, Christian Petrarca, 31 disposals, 13 kicks, 18 handballs, 2 marks, 2 tackles, 9 clearances, 369 metres gained, and 8 score involvements. West Coast versus St Kilda. 1 vote, Jack Higgins, 12 disposals, 7 kicks, 5 handballs, 4 marks, 3 tackles, 1 clearance, 208 metres gained, 5 goals, and 9 score involvements. 2 votes, Jack Sinclair, 38 disposals, 30 kicks, 8 handballs, 7 marks, 3 tackles, 6 clearances, 953 metres gained, and 5 score involvements. 3 votes, Rowan Marshall, 27 disposals, 19 kicks, 8 handballs, 8 marks, 5 tackles, 40 hitouts, 5 clearances, 431 metres gained, 1 goal, and 6 score involvements. And after 10 rounds of football, this is how our top 3 looks for the MVP award. In 3rd place, on 12 votes respectively, we have Essendon's Zach Merritt, Fremantle's Caleb Sarong, and Gold Coast's Noah Anderson. In 2nd place, on 14 votes, we have Fremantle's Andrew Brayshaw and Geelong's Bailey Smith. And in 1st place, on 15 votes, we have Adelaide's Jordan Dawson and Collingwood's Nick Dacos. And now we transition into the round 10 team of the week, which did take me a little bit of time to piece together for certain positions, but I think definitively this is where I fall with the best players in those positions for the round. I've seen some team of the weeks by, SEN and Fox and stuff have Harris Andrews in here, and I question, how can Harris Andrews had 10 disposals at fullback? Like, how can he be in the team of the week? This, though, creates discussion point just like those ones do. Their opinions aren't going to be the same as mine, just like my opinions aren't going to be the same as yours. So when it comes to my team of the week, when it comes to my MVP awards, if I'm getting something right, if I'm getting something wrong, let's talk about it. Comment section down below is open. But with that being said, this is my team of the round for round 10. In defense, we have Jack Sinclair and Dane Zorko in the back pockets, and Mark O'Connor at full back. Across half-back, we have John Noble and Bailey Dale, with Brady Huff at centre half-back. Across the centre, we have Bailey Smith and Chad Warner on the wings, with Isaac Heaney in the centre. Across half-forward, we have Ben Long and Cam Zurhaar on the half-forward flanks, with Darcy Fogarty at centre half-forward. In the forward pockets, we have Riley West and Jack Higgins, with Jeremy Cameron at full forward. Tristan Cherry takes the ruck honours again this week with Caleb Sarong as ruck rover and Tom Liberatore as rover. Our interchange consists of Toby Nankervis, Andrew Brayshaw, Jordan Dawson and Ed Richards. Our sub this week is Adam Chera. Again, I'm not sure whether I should be putting an actual sub in here, but Adam Chera played a good game, and the sub I am using as a default fifth man for the interchange bench. And coach of the round, by no surprise, has to go to Andrew McQualter for West Coast picking up their first win of the season against St Kilda. That is it for this video. Thank you for joining me yet again for another week of AFL action and rounding it all up. I do appreciate you guys turning out to support what I do, so if you'd like to continue doing so, I would appreciate it if you hit that like button down below and you consider joining the community we are building here by hitting that subscribe button as well. As I just touched on, if you agree with my team of the week, if you think I'm missing out on players when it comes to that or the voting or anything else, let's talk about it in the comments down below. Let me know as well how you think your team is faring for the 2025 season. I'd love to get discussions going. I've had people in the past talk about teams like GWS and supporting GWS. I've been getting comments from St Kilda supporters in the comments down below as well. So I'd really like to open up discussion points for anybody and everybody to get involved, especially if you guys at home have any ideas for content you would like to see me drop on this channel moving forward. But that's it from me, guys. I'm out of here, and as always, I will catch you guys next time.